Matilda always knew she wasn't pretty. She hid her plain face under a heavy bonnet, hoping the world would forget she was there. But when a silent Apache warrior found her, he saw something no one else did. And he showed her not with words, but with a sacred ceremony that would change her life forever. The stagecoach kicked up clouds of dust as it rolled to a stop in Cedar Ridge. Matilda stepped down carefully, holding her worn travel bag close. She pulled her bonnet forward to hide more of her face. The afternoon sun beat down hard on the small western town. Wooden buildings lined the main street. A few people watched from doorways and porches. Their eyes followed her, but no one smiled or raved. Matilda had come here to start over. Back east, she had worked as a seamstress until the shop closed. Now she hoped to find work in this frontier town. She walked to the boarding house at the end of the street. Mrs. Hammond, the owner, looked her up and down. The older woman's mouth turned down at the corners. "You got money to pay?" Mrs. Hammond asked. "Yes, ma'am. I can pay for 2 weeks up front. Rooms at the top of the stairs. Last door on the right. No visitors, no noise after dark." Matilda nodded and climbed the narrow stairs. Her room was small and plain, with just a bed, a chair, and a washstand. She set down her bag and looked in the cracked mirror above the washstand. Her face stared back at her. Plain brown eyes, a nose that was too long, lips that were too thin. She touched the strings of her bonnet, but didn't take it off. Even alone, she felt safer with it on. The next morning, Matilda went to the general store to ask about work. The owner, Mr. Clark, barely looked at her. "Don't need help," he said, turning back to his ledger. She tried the hotel next, then the restaurant, then the laundry. Every answer was the same. No one needed help. But Matilda saw the truth in their eyes. They didn't want someone who looked like her working where customers could see. Days passed this way. Matilda would leave the boarding house early each morning to look for work. She would return each evening with nothing. The money she had saved was running low. Soon she wouldn't be able to pay Mrs. Hammond for the room. One morning, Matilda decided to walk outside of town. Maybe one of the ranches needed someone to cook or clean. She followed the dusty road that led west. The town grew smaller behind her. She walked for an hour, then 2. The sun climbed higher. She had brought water, but it was almost gone. A rattling sound made her freeze. There, coiled beside a rock, was a rattlesnake. Its tail shook fast. Its head rose up, ready to strike. Matilda couldn't move. Fear locked her legs in place. Then, quick as lightning, something flew through the air. A knife buried itself in the snake's head. The snake fell still. Matilda's heart pounded as she turned to see who had thrown the knife. An Apache warrior stood 20 feet away. He was tall and lean, with long black hair that hung past his shoulders. His dark eyes watched her carefully. He wore leather pants and a simple shirt. Beads and feathers decorated his belt. Matilda had heard stories about the Apache. The townspeople said they were dangerous. But this man had just saved her life. He walked over and pulled his knife from the snake. He looked at her again, then at the road back to town. Without a word, he started walking that way. Matilda understood he meant for her to follow. They walked in silence. He stayed a few steps ahead, alert to any danger. When they reached the edge of town, he stopped. He looked at her once more, then turned and disappeared into the desert. Back in her room, Matilda couldn't stop thinking about the warrior. He hadn't spoken, but his eyes had been kind. No one in Cedar Ridge had ever looked at her with kindness. 3 days later, Matilda found a bundle on the boarding house porch with her name written in charcoal on a piece of bark. Inside were herbs she recognized as medicine for headaches. She had mentioned her headaches to Mrs. Hammond just yesterday. But how did anyone else know? The next week, she found fresh rabbit meat wrapped in leaves. The week after that, a small pouch of cornmeal. Each gift appeared and no one was watching, but Matilda knew who was leaving them. The Apache warrior was helping her survive. The townspeople began to notice. They saw the gifts. They whispered when Matilda walked by. "That plain girl is friendly with the savages," said Mrs. Taylor at the well. "Probably the only man who'd look at her," rasped Mrs. Clark. "It's not proper," said Mrs. Hammond loudly. "Not proper at all." Their words hurt, but Matilda tried not to listen.
The warrior's gifts were keeping her fed. His kindness was the only good thing in her life. One evening, Matilda was walking back from another failed attempt to find work when she saw him. The warrior stood at the edge of town, half hidden by shadows. She walked toward him slowly. When she got close, she whispered. He studied her face. Then he pointed to himself and said one word. Kael. Kael, she repeated. I'm Matilda. He nodded once, then melted back into the darkness. After that, they met sometimes at sunset. Kael would appear at the town's edge. They would stand together in comfortable silence. Sometimes he would point to things and say their names in his language. She would repeat them, and he would almost smile. The townspeople grew angrier. They stopped pretending to be polite. You should be ashamed, Mrs. Hammond told her one morning. Meeting with that savage. No decent woman would do such a thing. He's been kind to me, Matilda said quietly. Kind? Mrs. Hammond's voice rose. Those people killed settlers. They're not like us. But then, you're not much like us either, are you? No wonder you have to settle for a savage's attention. The words cut deep. Matilda ran to her room and cried into her pillow. The cruel comments got worse. People would cross the street to avoid her. Children threw small stones when their parents weren't looking. The baker refused to sell her bread. The whole town had turned against her. One afternoon it became too much. Matilda had gone to the well for water. A group of women stood there, including Mrs. Clark and Mrs. Taylor. There she is, Mrs. Clark said loudly. The savage's woman. Look at her, hiding under that bonnet, Mrs. Taylor added. As if that helps. We all know what's under there. No wonder she has to take up with an Apache. No white man would want her. My husband says she's the ugliest woman he's ever seen, said a younger woman. Says looking at her makes him lose his appetite. They all laughed. The sound was sharp and mean. Matilda dropped her water bucket. It clattered on the ground as she ran. She ran through town, past the boarding house, past everything. She ran until the town was far behind. She ran until her legs gave out. Then she fell to her knees in the desert dust and sobbed. The sun was setting when Kael found her. She was still crying, her bonnet askew, her face red and swollen. He knelt beside her but didn't speak. They're right, Matilda said between sobs. Everything they say is true. She reached up with shaking hands and untied her bonnet. She pulled it off and threw it on the ground. Her plain brown hair fell around her shoulders. Look at me, she said. I'm not pretty. I've never been pretty. I hide under that bonnet because I can't stand to see people look away from my face. My mother told me when I was young that I would have to work harder than pretty girls. But I would have to be better, kinder, more useful. But it doesn't matter. No one sees past his face. She covered her face with her hands. I'm so tired of being ugly. I'm tired of being alone. I'm tired of pretending it doesn't hurt. Kael was quiet for a long moment. Then he gently pulled her hands away from her face. He looked into her eyes. His expression was serious but soft. He shook his head slowly, as if to say she was wrong. Then he moved behind her. His fingers touched her hair lightly. Matilda went still. She felt him separate her hair into sections. Kael wove the strands in a complex pattern. His fingers moved with practiced skill. As he worked, he hummed low in his throat. The sound was soothing, almost like a prayer. From a pouch at his belt, he pulled out a small white feather. He wove it into the braid. Then came a blue bead, the color of the sky just after sunset. He added a strip of soft leather, dyed red with desert plants. Matilda understood this was not just braiding. This was something sacred. Among Kael's people, braiding hair was a ceremony. It was done for important moments. It was done with love and respect. It was a blessing. The sun had set completely by the time he finished. The desert was painted in shades of purple and gray. Kael moved to face her again. He touched the braids gently, then placed his hand over his heart. His eyes told her everything his voice couldn't. She was beautiful to him. She was worthy of ceremony, of blessing, of time and care. Matilda's eyes filled with fresh tears, but these were different.
These were tears of something she had never felt before. Acceptance. Worth. Beauty. Kael helped her stand. He walked her back to the edge of town, as he had that first day. But this time, Matilda didn't feel alone. The next morning, Matilda woke early. She looked in the cracked mirror. Her hair was still in the elaborate braids Kael had created. The feather caught the morning light. The blue bead seemed to glow. She looked different. Not because her face had changed, but because she saw herself differently. She left her bonnet on the bed. Walking through town that morning was the bravest thing Matilda had ever done. Her head was high. Her braided hair was visible to everyone. The feather moved slightly in the breeze. People stared. Mrs. Hammond gasped from her porch. Mr. Clark came out of his store to look. Children pointed. But their stares didn't hurt anymore. Matilda knew something they didn't. She had been blessed. She had been seen, truly seen, and found beautiful. Not by the town standards, but by someone whose opinion actually mattered. Mrs. Taylor stepped into her path. "What have you done to your hair? You look like a savage yourself now."
Matilda met her eyes steadily.
"I look like someone who is loved."
Mrs. Taylor's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She had no response to that. Matilda kept walking. At the general store, she bought supplies with the last of her money. She packed her few belongings. She left a note for Mrs. Hammond saying she was leaving. At sunset, Kael was waiting at the usual spot. But this time, he had a horse with him. His eyes asked a question. Matilda's eyes gave the answer. They rode away from Cedar Ridge together. They rode toward the mountains where Kael's people lived. Matilda didn't look back at the town. There was nothing there for her. In the weeks that followed, Kael taught her his ways. His people welcomed her, though some were cautious at first. She learned their language slowly. She learned to cook their food, to work with leather and beads. She learned that beauty meant something different here. It meant strength. It meant kindness. It meant being useful to your people.
Kael's grandmother, an old woman with eyes like deep pools, took Matilda's face in her withered hands one day. She studied her features and smiled. "Good face," she said in broken English. "Strong face, face that survives." Matilda married Kael when the autumn came. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. He braided her hair again, this time with silver beads and eagle feathers. The tribe sang songs of blessing. They danced around the fire until dawn. Years passed. Matilda had 2 children, a boy and a girl. She taught them both English and Apache. She taught them to be proud of who they were. When her daughter once said she wasn't pretty, Matilda sat her down and braided her hair with all the love and ceremony Kael had shown her.
Beauty, Matilda told her daughter, is not what others see. Beauty is being loved for exactly who you are. Beauty is someone taking time to braid your hair like a prayer. Beauty is knowing your worth even when the world says you have none. Sometimes traders would pass through and bring news of Cedar Ridge. The town had struggled and slowly died as the mines ran dry. The people who had been so cruel had scattered to other places. But Matilda didn't feel satisfaction at this news. She felt only peace. One evening, as the sun set over the mountains, Matilda sat with Kael watching their children play. Her hair was still braided in the traditional way, now mixed with gray strands that Kael said looked like silver threads in the moonlight. "You saved me," she told him. He shook his head. "You were always strong. I only helped you see." She leaned against his shoulder. The little girl who had hidden under a bonnet was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, a woman who had learned that real beauty comes from being truly seen and deeply loved. The sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Their children's laughter echoed off the canyon walls. Life was good. Life was beautiful. And Matilda never wore a bonnet again. True beauty isn't about perfect features or fitting what others expect. It's about finding someone who sees your real worth. It's about ceremonies of love, whether that's braiding hair or any other act of deep care. When someone loves you for exactly who you are, that's when you discover what beauty really means. What moments in your life have shown you that you're worthy of love just as you are?
Share your story in the comments below. And if the story touched your heart, please subscribe to hear more tales of love triumphing over judgment.